The girls of Nyaruba High School for girls buzzed with excitement as the new term began. Everyone was eager to meet the new biology teacher, Madam Nzinga. The previous teacher had retired unexpectedly, and rumors about her replacement had swirled for weeks. When Madam Nzinga stepped into the assembly hall that morning, she instantly commanded attention. Tall and regal, she moved with a grace that felt almost otherworldly. Her skin glowed like polished ebony, and her piercing eyes seemed to see straight through you. She introduced herself with a calm but commanding voice. "I expect discipline and focus in my class," she said, her tone leaving no room for debate. The students whispered amongst themselves as she left the stage. "She's so elegant," one girl murmured. "But doesn't she seem distant?" another replied. As the day wore on, Madam Nzinga's charm intrigued students and staff alike, though some noted an unusual chill in her presence. Nandi, a lively and curious senior, was one of them. She watched Madam Nzinga from the dormitory window that evening and noticed something odd. The teacher was pacing the grounds alone, holding a red flask in her hand. Her lips moved as if she were speaking, but there was no one there. "She's just stressed," Nandi reasoned aloud, turning to her roommate, Zola. But a flicker of doubt lingered in her mind. Later that night, as the dormitory lights went out, Nandi couldn't sleep. Her thoughts kept returning to Madam Nzinga and that strange flask. She felt an inexplicable unease, as though a shadow had fallen over the school. It was only the first day, but something about Madam Nzinga didn't feel right. That night, the atmosphere in Dormitory B was alive with chatter. The girls were still buzzing about Madam Nzinga. Her striking beauty, her cold demeanor, and, most of all, her strange nightly wanderings had already become a favorite topic of gossip. "I saw her pacing near the garden," one girl said, pulling her blanket up to her chin. "She was talking to herself." "No way," another replied. "Maybe she's lonely or misses her family." Zola, who was reading under the dim light of a torch, sighed loudly. "You're all overreacting. She's probably adjusting to the new place. Not everyone wants to make friends." Nandi, however, couldn't shake what she'd seen. "But what about the red flask?" she asked. "Why would she be wandering so late at night?" Zola rolled her eyes. "Why are you so fixated on her? Maybe it's tea or medicine." Nandi stayed silent, but the unease in her chest grew. Later that night, as the dormitory lights dimmed and the girls drifted off to sleep, Nandi found herself wide awake. Her mind raced with questions she couldn't answer. The image of Madam Nzinga's red flask haunted her. At midnight, a faint sound drifted through the dormitory window. It was humming, low, soft, and unrecognizable. Nandi froze in her bed, listening closely. Peeking out from under her blanket, she noticed a faint figure walking past the dormitory. She slid out of bed carefully and tiptoed to the window. Sure enough, Madam Nzinga was there, walking toward the old, abandoned science wing. She held the red flask tightly, and her movements were almost hypnotic. Nandi's stomach turned. "What is she doing out there?" she whispered to herself. The question lingered in her mind as the night grew darker. The following morning, chaos erupted in the dining hall. Amina, the school's star athlete, was missing. Her bed was untouched, and no one had seen her since the previous evening. Whispers of concern filled the air, but the administration was quick to address the situation. Principal Otieno stood at the podium, her voice calm but firm. "Amina is likely visiting her family without permission. We have contacted her parents and will update you as soon as we know more. Please focus on your studies." The explanation didn't sit well with Nandi. Amina had been her usual cheerful self the day before, laughing about the upcoming track meet and promising to win the gold medal for the school. "She wouldn't just leave," Nandi muttered to Zola as they walked back to class. "Maybe she got overwhelmed," Zola replied, though even she sounded unsure. You know how these things go. As the day wore on, Nandi couldn't stop thinking about the incident. Her unease grew when Adhiambo, another classmate, fainted during biology class. Madam Nzinga, who had been explaining photosynthesis, paused mid-sentence, her gaze lingering on Adhiambo as she was helped out of the room. Later, Nandi visited Adhiambo in the infirmary. "What happened?" she asked gently. "I don't know," Adhiambo replied weakly. "I just feel so drained. I've been feeling this way since last night." "Were you in the science lab?" Nandi pressed. Adhiambo nodded. "Madam Nzinga asked me to stay behind and clean up after class." Nandi's heart raced. Something wasn't right. First Amina's disappearance, and now Adhiambo's mysterious illness. The pieces didn't fit, but Nandi was certain of one thing: Madam Nzinga was at the center of it all. That night, Nandi lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Sleep eluded her as thoughts of Amina's disappearance and Adhiambo's strange illness swirled in her mind. She tried to piece everything together, but nothing made sense. Exhausted, she eventually drifted into a restless sleep. Her dreams were vivid and unsettling. In the dream, she found herself in a dimly lit room surrounded by flickering candles. The walls were covered in strange symbols, and at the center of the room stood Madam Nzinga. She was holding the red flask, its contents glowing ominously. Madam Nzinga's eyes burned like embers as she tipped the flask to her lips. As she drank, ghostly faces swirled in the liquid, Amina's face among them. Nandi tried to scream, but her voice was gone. Madam Nzinga turned to her, a sinister smile spreading across her face. "You're next," she whispered. Nandi woke with a start, her heart pounding in her chest. Sweat clung to her forehead, and the room felt suffocatingly hot. She sat up, clutching her blanket tightly. The dream had felt so real, too real to dismiss. The next morning, she shared the dream with Zola. "You're scaring yourself," Zola said, though her tone lacked conviction. "It's just a dream, Nandi." "Then why does it feel like more than that?" Nandi snapped. "Amina is missing, Adhiambo is sick, and Madam Nzinga, there's something wrong with her." Zola sighed. "Look, if it makes you feel better, we'll keep an eye on her. But don't jump to conclusions." Later that day, Nandi noticed faint marks on Adhiambo's neck. "Did something bite you?" she asked. Adhiambo frowned, confused. "I don't know," she murmured. "I don't remember." Nandi's unease deepened. The dream wasn't just a dream, it was a warning. The following day, Nandi's unease turned into resolve. She couldn't ignore the strange events any longer. The missing Amina, Adhiambo's sudden illness, her nightmare, it all pointed to one person, Madam Nzinga. But she needed proof. She turned to Zola during lunch. "We have to check the old science wing tonight," Nandi said in a low voice. "That's where she goes every night with that flask." Zola hesitated, pushing her food around on her plate. "You're taking this too far, Nandi. If we get caught, do you really want to wait until someone else disappears?" Nandi interrupted. Zola sighed and reluctantly agreed. Later that night, the two girls slipped out of their dormitory, their footsteps muffled against the cool grass. The old science wing loomed in the distance, its windows dark and foreboding. It had been abandoned years ago after a fire damaged part of the building. Students were forbidden to enter, but that hadn't stopped Madam Nzinga. The door was locked, as expected, but Nandi had come prepared. She pointed to a broken window near the side of the building. "We'll go in through there," she whispered. Inside, the air was heavy and cold, as though the building itself was holding its breath. Dust covered the surfaces, and broken glass crunched underfoot. The girls found themselves in what used to be a laboratory. Rusted shelves lined the walls, holding jars filled with murky liquids and dried herbs. What is all this? Zola whispered, running her finger over one of the jars. Nandi was about to respond when a noise made them freeze. Footsteps echoed down the hall, growing louder with each step. Panicking, the girls crouched behind the cabinet, holding their breath as the footsteps stopped just outside the room. Nandi and Zola crouched in silence as the footsteps outside the room stopped. For a moment, neither of them dared to breathe. Then, just as suddenly as they had come, the footsteps receded. The girls exchanged a panicked look but remained frozen until the sound faded completely. "We need to leave," Zola whispered, her voice trembling. "Not yet," Nandi insisted. "We haven't found anything." Zola reluctantly followed as Nandi tiptoed toward a shelf filled with books and papers. They found faded notebooks, diagrams of plants, and a strange journal bound in leather. Nandi slipped the journal into her pocket just as they heard the footsteps again, this time accompanied by a low humming. "It's her," Zola mouthed, tugging on Nandi's sleeve. "Let's go." The two scrambled back to the window they had entered, slipping out just in time to see a shadowy figure enter the laboratory. Clutching the journal tightly, they ran back to their dormitory, their hearts pounding. Once safely inside, Nandi opened the journal. It was filled with strange symbols and charts. Toward the back, she found lists of names, students from the school. Some names were crossed out with red X's, including Amina's. "What does this mean?" Zola asked, her face pale. "I don't know," Nandi replied, her voice shaking. "But it's not good." The next day, Nandi shared the discovery with Zola during a quiet moment. Zola's face turned grim as she recalled a story her grandmother had told her. "There's an old tale about an Ayama Yochikondi," she said. "A blood spirit. It preys on young people to stay strong. It can disguise itself as human." "You think?" "Madam Nzinga," Nandi whispered. Zola nodded slowly. "I don't want to believe it, but everything fits." The discovery of the journal left Nandi and Zola shaken. The list of names, the cryptic symbols, it all pointed to something sinister. As the sun set that evening, the girls decided they needed to return to the old science wing to investigate further. "We can't let this go," Nandi said firmly. "We need to find out what else she's hiding." Zola hesitated, but eventually nodded. "Fine. But if we hear anything, we run." Armed with flashlights and an old scarf to cover their footprints in the dust, the girls slipped out of the dormitory again. The air was colder than the previous night, and the old science wing seemed even more forbidding. This time, they took care to search more thoroughly. Nandi flipped through stacks of papers and books while Zola scanned the shelves. In one corner, they found a loose floorboard. Nandi pried it open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a leather-bound journal similar to the one they had taken the night before. This one, however, contained far more chilling entries. Pages were filled with diagrams of human anatomy and detailed notes about essence extraction. Symbols and charts showed the lunar phases, with detailed descriptions of rituals for specific dates. "I think she's using the blood moon for something," Nandi whispered, flipping through the pages. "Look at this, she's been planning it for months." Before Zola could respond, the air in the room shifted. A faint humming filled the space, and the temperature dropped. Nandi quickly stuffed the journal into her bag as footsteps echoed down the hall. "It's her," Zola whispered. The girls darted toward the window, but before they could escape, a shadow appeared in the doorway. Madam Nzinga stood there, her red flask glowing faintly in her hand. Madam Nzinga's figure loomed in the doorway, the faint glow of her red flask casting eerie shadows on the walls. Nandi and Zola froze, their breaths caught in their throats. For a long moment, no one moved. "Who's there?" Madam Nzinga's voice was calm but sharp, slicing through the silence like a blade. Without thinking, Nandi grabbed Zola's arm and pulled her toward the window. They slipped through the narrow opening and ran as fast as their legs could carry them, not daring to look back. The sound of humming echoed faintly behind them, but they didn't stop until they were safely back in the dormitory. Inside, both girls collapsed onto Nandi's bed, gasping for breath. "She saw us," Zola panted. "She knows someone was there." "But she didn't catch us," Nandi said, clutching the journal tightly. "We need to figure out what's in this before she does." Over the next few days, Nandi and Zola worked in secret to decipher the journal's contents. The more they read, the more terrified they became. The entries described rituals designed to extract essence from young people, particularly during phases of the moon. The blood moon was highlighted as a time of immense power. "She's draining the students," Nandi whispered one night as they pored over the journal in their dorm room. "That's why Amina disappeared, and why Adhiambo is so weak. She's using their blood." Zola's face turned pale. "But why? What does she gain?" "Power. Youth. Strength. It's all here," Nandi replied grimly, pointing to a diagram. "She's not human, Zola. She's something else." The realization left them shaken. They didn't know what Madame Nzinga was planning for the blood moon, but they knew one thing for certain: they had to stop her. The following night, Nandi sat by the dormitory window, staring out at the moon as it hung low in the sky. It wasn't full yet, but it was nearing. She couldn't stop thinking about the diagrams in the journal. The blood moon was only a few nights away, and Madame Nzinga's plans were growing clearer. "She's building up to something," Nandi said quietly, turning to Zola. "The journal mentioned a ritual during the blood moon. She's going to use it to gain more power." Zola shivered, pulling her blanket tighter around her shoulders. "What do we do? We can't just confront her, she'll know we've been snooping." "We have to warn someone," Nandi said, though her voice wavered. She thought of Principal Otieno, but the stern administrator had already dismissed Amina's disappearance as a runaway case. Would she even listen? The next day, another student fainted during class. This time it was Leila, a quiet girl from dormitory C. The pattern was unmistakable now. All the affected students had been seen spending extra time in Madame Nzinga's lab. At lunch, Nandi gathered Zola, along with two other trusted friends, Pendo and Leila's cousin Osha. Quietly, she explained what she and Zola had discovered. The other girls listened in stunned silence. "Are you saying she's a monster?" Osha whispered, her eyes wide. "Not just a monster. A blood spirit," Nandi said firmly. "And she's targeting us." Pendo frowned. "How do we stop her?" "If what you're saying is true, she's dangerous." "I don't know yet," Nandi admitted. "But we have to act fast. The blood moon is in 3 nights." The girls agreed to meet after curfew to plan. Time was running out, and they knew they were up against something far more powerful than they'd ever imagined. The 4 girls huddled together in the shadows of the dormitory common room after lights out. Nandi, Zola, Pendo, and Osha spoke in hushed voices, careful not to wake the other students or attract attention. Nandi laid the journal on the table, flipping through its pages of diagrams and cryptic notes. "This is where she documents her rituals," Nandi whispered, pointing to a detailed drawing of a moon. "The blood moon is the focal point. She's been draining students' energy to prepare for it." Pendo leaned closer, her face pale in the dim light. "What happens during the blood moon?" Nandi hesitated. "I think she plans to perform a full ritual. This journal says it will give her permanent strength and power, but it requires 3 sacrifices." Osha gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Sacrifices? Do you think she's already chosen who?" "Most likely," Nandi said grimly. "Amina was our first victim. Adhiambo and Leila have been weakened. They could be next. We have to stop her," Zola said, her voice trembling. But how? She's not human. She's some kind of spirit. Nandi nodded. That's why we need help. Mama Ofia might know something. Mama Ofia was the dorm matron, an elderly woman known for her knowledge of herbs, traditions, and old legends. The girls decided to approach her the following evening. As they prepared to return to their rooms, Pendo paused. What if she knows we are onto her? What if she comes after us? She won't, Nandi said firmly, though she wasn't entirely sure. We'll stick together and move quickly. The next day, the girls approached Mama Afia cautiously during the midday break. She was sitting outside the staff quarters, weaving a basket under the shade of a large acacia tree. Her sharp eyes watched them as they approached. What brings you here, little ones? Mama Afia asked, her voice warm but probing. Nandi stepped forward. Mama, we need your help. We've discovered something strange about Madam Nzinga. Mama Afia raised an eyebrow but didn't interrupt. Nandi quickly explained everything they had uncovered, the nighttime rituals, the journal, the glowing red flask, and the connection to the blood moon. By the time she finished, Mama Afia's face had grown grave. You're speaking of a blood spirit, Mama Afia said quietly, setting her basket aside. The Nyama Yochikondi is an ancient creature, known to feed on the life force of the young. They take on human forms to blend in. If this Madam Nzinga is what you say, she is dangerous. What can we do? Zola asked, her voice trembling. Mama Afia leaned back, her expression thoughtful. Blood spirits are strong, but they are not invincible. They can be weakened with sacred herbs, ones that disrupt their connection to the spirit world. And they can be bound during their rituals if caught at the right moment. Sacred herbs? Osha asked. Where can we find them? They grow near the baobab tree in the forest, Mama Afia said. But the path is not safe. Spirits guard those trees fiercely. We'll go, Nandi said firmly, looking at her friends. We have to. Mama Afia nodded. Be careful. Bring the herbs back here, and I will prepare a charm for you. But remember, the blood moon is near. If you fail, the consequences will be dire. The girls exchanged nervous glances, but there was no turning back now. That evening, the girls set out toward the forest on the edge of the school grounds. The air was heavy with the scent of rain, though the sky remained clear. Nandi led the way, clutching a flashlight while her heart pounded in her chest. Behind her, Zola, Pendo, and Osha followed, their footsteps hesitant but determined. Mama Afia's warning echoed in their minds. The sacred baobab tree was protected by spirits, and the journey would be fraught with danger. But they had no choice. Without the herbs, they had no way to fight Madam Nzinga. The forest was darker and colder than they had imagined. Shadows danced between the trees, and the usual sounds of crickets and rustling leaves were eerily absent. As they ventured deeper, the girls began to feel a strange pressure, as though the air itself were pushing against them. There, Nandi whispered, pointing ahead. The baobab tree towered over the others, its massive trunk twisted and ancient. Its roots spread out like veins, and beneath its branches, a faint glow emanated from the ground. The girls approached cautiously, and there, growing at the base of the tree, were the sacred herbs. Their silvery leaves shimmered in the dim light, almost pulsing with energy. Just as Nandi reached for the herbs, the air grew icy. A low growl echoed through the forest. The girls froze as glowing eyes appeared in the darkness, one pair, then another, until they were surrounded. Spirits, Zola whispered, her voice shaking. The glowing eyes belonged to shadowy figures, their forms barely visible. They moved closer, growling softly, their presence oppressive. Nandi clenched her fist. We have to take the herbs, she said, her voice firm. no matter what. Summoning her courage, she grabbed the plants, and the spirits surged forward. The spirits lunged as Nandi grasped the sacred herbs, their shadowy forms swirling like smoke but moving with terrifying speed. The girls screamed as the temperature around them dropped, the icy air biting into their skin. "Run!" Nandi shouted, clutching the herbs tightly. She bolted toward the path they had come from, the others following close behind. The spirits howled, their voices reverberating through the forest, shaking the leaves above. Usha tripped on an exposed root, letting out a cry as one of the spirits reached for her. Its smoky tendrils wrapped around her ankle, pulling her back. "Help!" she screamed. Nandi skidded to a stop and turned back. Without thinking, she grabbed a stick from the ground and swung it at the spirit. The stick passed through the shadow, but the motion distracted the entity long enough for Zola to grab Osha's hand and pull her free. "We have to keep moving," Pendo yelled, her face pale with fear. The girls ran as fast as they could, the spirits chasing them with relentless speed. As they neared the forest edge, Mama Afia's warning came to Nandi's mind. "Sacred herbs disrupt the spirit's connection to this world," she had said. Thinking quickly, Nandi tore a handful of the silvery leaves and threw them behind her. The spirits shrieked as the herbs scattered in the air, their forms flickering like dying flames. It gave the girls just enough time to burst out of the forest and back onto the school grounds. They collapsed on the grass, gasping for breath. The spirits did not follow. "We did it," Zola panted, clutching her chest. Nandi held up the bundle of herbs triumphantly. "We have what we need. Now, we fight." The girls returned to Mama Afia's quarters, exhausted but triumphant. The sacred herbs shimmered faintly under the dim light of the lantern on her table. She nodded approvingly as she inspected the bundle, her hands moving with practiced precision. "You were brave to face the spirits," Mama Afia said, her voice low. "Now, we must act quickly. The blood moon rises tomorrow night." The matron began grinding the herbs into a fine paste, mixing them with ashes from a clay pot and murmuring prayers under her breath. The air in the room grew heavy with the scent of the concoction, sharp and earthy. "These herbs will weaken her," Mama Afia explained, handing each girl a charm made from the paste wrapped in cloth. "Carry this with you at all times. When the time comes, use this powder." She held up a small pouch filled with the paste. "Throw it on her during the ritual. It will sever her connection to the spirit world, leaving her vulnerable." "What happens if we fail?" Zola asked hesitantly. Mama Afia's expression darkened. "If she completes the ritual, her power will grow beyond control. She will become unstoppable, and her victims will be lost forever." The room fell silent as the weight of the situation settled over them. Nandi clenched her fist. "We won't let that happen." As they left Mama Afia's quarters, the girls gathered in their dormitory to finalize their plan. They would wait for Madame Nzinga to begin the ritual and strike when she was most vulnerable. They rehearsed the steps in whispers, their nerves growing with each passing hour. When the blood moon began its ascent the next evening, the girls stood ready. They had their charms, their courage, and their resolve. Now, it was time to face Madame Nzinga. The blood moon rose, casting an eerie red glow over the school grounds. The air felt thick and heavy, charged with an unnatural energy. The girls gathered near the dormitory window, clutching their charms tightly. Each of them wore an expression of determination, though fear lingered in their eyes. "This is it," Nandi whispered. "Are we ready?" Zola nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. Pendo and Osha exchanged a nervous glance but gave their assent. They knew there was no turning back now. From their vantage point, they spotted Madame Nzinga making her way toward the old science wing. Her movements were deliberate, and she carried her red flask, its glow more intense than ever. The girls waited a few moments before slipping out into the shadows, following her trail. As they crept closer, the humming they had heard before grew louder. The sound was no longer soft and faint but a deep, resonant chant that seemed to vibrate in their bones. They peeked through the cracked windows of the abandoned building and saw Madame Nzinga in the center of the laboratory, surrounded by symbols drawn in blood. 3 students, including the weakened Adhiambo, lay unconscious on an altar-like table. "She's starting the ritual," Nandi whispered, her voice barely audible. Madame Nzinga raised her flask, chanting in a language none of them understood. The red light from the moon seemed to intensify, shining directly onto her and the altar. The girls exchanged nervous glances. "We have to act now," Nandi said, her voice firm despite the terror clawing at her. "Zola, you distract her. Osha and Pendo, get the students out. I'll use the powder." The plan was set. Stealing their nerves, they pushed open the door and stepped inside, ready to confront the spirits head-on. The door creaked loudly as the girls entered the old science wing. Madame Nzinga turned sharply, her eyes glowing a fire red, and her chanting stopped. For a moment, the air felt thick with tension as she stared at them, her lips curling into a sinister smile. "You shouldn't be here," Madame Nzinga said, her voice echoing unnaturally. "You have no idea what you're meddling with." Nandi stepped forward, clutching the pouch of sacred powder tightly. "We know exactly what you're doing, and we're here to stop you." Madame Nzinga's laugh was chilling. "Foolish children. You think you can stop me? I've waited too long for this moment." Zola took her cue, darting toward a nearby shelf and toppling its contents to the floor. The loud crash momentarily distracted Madame Nzinga, giving Osha and Pendo the chance to move toward the altar where Adhiambo and the other students lay unconscious. "Hurry!" Osha hissed, shaking Adhiambo gently. "Wake up!" Madame Nzinga's attention snapped back to the girls near the altar. With a wave of her hand, the air around them grew heavy, pinning Osha and Pendo in place. "You think you can take my sacrifices," she snarled, her voice layered with a deep, guttural tone. Zola threw another object to divert her attention, but this time, Madame Nzinga raised her flask, and a wave of energy knocked her backward. Nandi seized the moment, stepping closer to the center of the room. "You've taken enough from us," Nandi shouted, flinging the sacred powder toward Madame Nzinga. The powder hit her, and she screamed, clutching her chest as her form flickered. The glowing red flask dimmed momentarily. "We have to keep going," Nandi shouted, the girls' courage reigniting as they pressed their advantage. Madame Nzinga's scream reverberated through the room as the sacred powder struck her. She stumbled backward, clutching the red flask, her face contorted in rage. Her glowing eyes dimmed briefly, but the power of the blood moon still coursed through her. "You dare to defy me," she hissed, her voice layered with otherworldly tones. Her form began to shift, her elegant features melting into something grotesque. Her skin darkened and cracked like old bark, and her limbs stretched unnaturally long. She was no longer human. The girls froze in terror as Madame Nzinga's true form emerged, a hideous, shadowy creature with sharp claws and glowing red veins coursing through her body. "You cannot stop me," she roared. Nandi's voice broke through their fear. "We have to finish this," she yelled, grabbing another handful of the sacred powder. She threw it again, this time aiming for the altar. The powder scattered across the blood symbols, disrupting their glow. The students on the altar stirred faintly. "Pendo, Osha, get them out," Nandi commanded. Pendo and Osha shook off their fear and dragged Adhiambo and the others toward the door. Madame Nzinga lunged toward them, her claws slashing through the air. Zola grabbed a nearby chair and swung it at her, buying the others precious seconds. "Go. I'll hold her off," Zola shouted, though her hands shook. Nandi circled behind Madame Nzinga, clutching the pouch of powder. She remembered Mama Afia's words, aim for her connection to the spirit world, the source of her power. Spotting the glowing red flask clutched in Madam Nzinga's hand, Nandi darted forward. With all her strength, she threw the remaining powder directly at the flask. The glow immediately dimmed, and Madam Nzinga shrieked in pain, her body flickering like a dying flame. "Now!" Nandi yelled. "We are breaking her hold." Madam Nzinga howled as the sacred powder struck her flask, the light within it sputtering like a flame in the wind. Her body flickered, shifting between her monstrous form and her human disguise. The air grew colder, swirling with an unnatural energy, as though the building itself were reacting to her weakening state. "You will regret this," she shrieked, her voice fractured and layered with guttural tones. She raised her clawed hands, and a powerful force sent Zola flying against the wall. Nandi barely managed to stay on her feet, clutching the empty pouch. Asha and Pendo dragged Adhiambo and the other unconscious students out of the room, their faces pale with terror. "Hurry back!" Nandi shouted after them. "We need the charms." Madam Nzinga turned her glowing eyes on Nandi, her claws slicing through the air as she advanced. "You think you can stop me? I am eternal." Nandi stood her ground, fear clawing at her chest. "Not anymore," she said, clutching the charm Mama Afia had given her. She raised it high and threw it at Madam Nzinga, aiming for the flask again. This time, the charm struck true, shattering the flask into pieces. The room trembled violently as Madam Nzinga let out an ear-piercing scream. Red light spilled from her body, crackling like lightning as her monstrous form began to unravel. At that moment, Zola staggered to her feet, clutching the pouch of remaining powder. "Here," she shouted, tossing it to Nandi. With a deep breath, Nandi flung the last of the powder directly at the baobab symbol etched into the floor. The blood markings dissolved instantly, severing the spirit's connection to the ritual site. Madam Nzinga's body convulsed, her form growing weaker by the second. She clawed at the air, her voice now a whisper. "No, you cannot win." But her energy was fading, and the power of the blood moon no longer fueled her. Madam Nzinga's final scream echoed through the room as her body flickered and began to disintegrate. The red glow surrounding her shattered like glass, scattering shards of light across the room. Her monstrous form dissolved into smoke, which swirled violently before being sucked into the cracks in the floor, leaving only silence in its wake. Nandi collapsed onto her knees, her chest heaving as the weight of the moment hit her. Zola stumbled over, clutching her side where she had been thrown earlier. Is it over?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I think so," Nandi replied, though her voice wavered. The room, once charged with oppressive energy, now felt still, eerily still. The blood moon's light no longer seeped into the building, and the strange hum that had filled the air was gone. Pendo and Osha re-entered cautiously, their arms wrapped protectively around Adhiambo and the other students, who were now beginning to stir. "They are waking up," Pendo said, relief flooding her voice. Adhiambo blinked groggily, her eyes focusing on Nandi. "What happened?" she asked weakly. "You're safe now," Nandi said, helping her sit up. "It's over." The girls carefully guided the weakened students back to the dormitory, where Mama Afia was waiting. Her sharp eyes scanned each of them, her expression softening when she saw the sacred charms they still held. "You've done well," she said, placing a hand on Nandi's shoulder. "The spirit is gone, and her hold over this place is broken." "But what about Madam Nzinga?" Zola asked. Mama Afia sighed. She was no longer human. The spirit that controlled her has been bound, but her true form will remain trapped in the earth. She will never harm another soul. As the girls looked at one another, relief washed over them. They had faced the unthinkable, and won. The next morning, the school seemed brighter, as though a heavy cloud had finally lifted. The air was clear, and the students walked the grounds with newfound energy. Adhiambo and the other victims, though still weak, were recovering quickly. The strange marks on their necks had disappeared overnight, and their strength was slowly returning. Principal Otino addressed the students during assembly. She explained Madam Nzinga's sudden departure as a personal emergency, leaving out the harrowing details. The school staff worked quickly to erase all traces of the abandoned science wing and the events of the blood moon. Nandi, Zola, Pendo, and Osha sat quietly in the back of the assembly, exchanging knowing glances. Though the official story glossed over the truth, the girls knew they had saved their school from a great evil. And so did Mama Afia, who gave them a proud nod from the sidelines. Later that evening, as the girls gathered in the dormitory, they reflected on what had happened. "It feels like a dream," Zola said, staring at the faint scar on her arm from where Madam Nzinga had thrown her. But it wasn't. Nandi held the remnants of the journal in her lap, the pages now faded and illegible after the ritual had been broken. "We need to remember this," she said. "And make sure no one forgets. If a spirit like her ever tries this again, someone has to know how to stop it." The others nodded in agreement. Together, they wrote their story, carefully documenting everything they had learned about the blood spirit and how they had defeated it. They entrusted the pages to Mama Afia, who promised to guard the knowledge for future generations. In the weeks that followed, life at Nyaruba High School returned to normal. The girls returned to their studies, but they carried with them the strength and courage born from their experience. Nandi, Zola, Pendo, and Osha formed a bond that would never break, forged in the fires of their battle against the darkness. And though they never spoke openly of what had happened, they knew one thing for certain: evil could only thrive in silence. Their voices and their courage had been its undoing. Thank you so much for watching this incredible tale unfold. We truly appreciate each and every one of you who tuned in to listen. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, share, and leave us a comment below. We love hearing your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you're always the first to know when we upload new stories. There's plenty more to come, and we can't wait to share them with you. Thanks again for your support, and we'll see you in the next video. Stay tuned for more amazing stories.